Hello and welcome to Answers for Today. My name is Bill Wynne, and I'm here in studio with Pastor Terry Reynolds of Agape Chapel in Orange County. And we're here in the studio continuing along in our discussion about liberty and freedom in Christ from Galatians chapter 5. So with that, Terry, I'll hand it off to you.
Folks, we were just laughing, and we were having we always have a great time when we're in studio. Of course, I was with 42 years with Pastor Chuck Smith at Calvary Chapel, and last night I had the joy of being with Case Smith as we do a Monday night home Bible study at our house, and we were just laughing. So as he opens, he says, "Terry Reynolds with Calvary Chapel," what a joy, what a heritage that Pastor Chuck gave all of us. To be men and women of the Word, to study God's Word, and I had the privilege of being real close to him the last few years. And one of the great concerns that Chuck had concerning the churches that even as it tells us in Galatians earlier, Bill, when it tells us in Galatians chapter 3, it says, "O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you that you would not obey the truth before the eyes of Jesus Christ, who evidently set forth and was crucified among you?" And he says that you haven't learned Christ that way. Pastor Chuck was concerned, Paul the Apostle was concerned, that they would once again fall back into the yoke of bondage, the things that would entrap them. And really, that's kind of where we're picking it up from last week's program, the dangers of falling back. And you touched on it, and we didn't go very far on it, really to entertain false teaching that's out there that really does entrap us, right?
Right, and it's very, very easy to get trapped, because what happens is we want to take the easy way. You know, the natural man wants to follow the flesh.
Yes.
And the flesh is usually the easier way in the short term. And it's usually the way that looks the most pleasurable in the short term. But in fact, if we consider what the Bible has to say and consider what lessons we've learned, we learn that in the end, over the longer term, it's not the best way. And that bondage sets in, and we follow a path that leads us away from Christ.
Yeah, but there's the way that Paul writes so often, he presents a problem that they're going through at the church. And the thing is so beautiful with the problem, it brings us a solution too. Paul writes us and gives the church there a solution to the problem. The problem is that there were those at Antioch that was going back into Judaism, and there were groups of people that was leaving Jerusalem to try to reintroduce their Jewish roots, per se. They were known as the Judaizers. And here Paul is telling them, be set free. Well, it's one thing just to say to be set free, but how are you set free? And he tells us in verse 16 of chapter 5, it's so important for all of us, where he says, "This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh." So, Bill, Paul is saying the key for us to maintain our freedom and not to be in bondage again is a life of walking in the Spirit, right?
Right, which is the opposite of walking in the flesh.
Yes.
So we need to learn how to walk in the Spirit and to discern that about our own lives. And in fact, Terry, we've both taught and taken a number of times. I have this course called Self-Confrontation.
Very good.
And in this Self-Confrontation course, which I highly recommend to anybody, it's put out by the Biblical Counseling Foundation out of Palm Springs or Palm Desert, but it causes you to look at yourself and to understand whether you are in fact walking in the Spirit. And we can discern that about our own life based on the decisions we're making and the steps we're taking each and every day.
Yeah. As he goes on, he says, if you walk in the Spirit, I think it's important for us to ask ourselves, how do you walk in the Spirit? What does it take in order to be walking in the Spirit? And it really does come down, first of all, even as we came to know Christ as Lord and Savior, it involved our choice. it really involves our will, doesn't it, to make a choice daily to walk in the Spirit, Bill?
That's right. And it's one of those things where walking in the Spirit is a decision that we make each day to make certain things a priority in our life. And first among those, of course, is to abide in Jesus, right? And if we abide, that means that we're going to obey.
Yes.
And so the way we know how to obey is if we know what the Word says, so we can obey the law.
That's so beautiful, because, the walk in the Spirit is really the only life of a Christian. Because life away from walking in the Spirit as a Christian, it's really a life of frustration. He goes on, he says, the flesh lusts against the Spirit against the flesh, and they're contrary one to another, so that you cannot do the things that you would. And so there's a battle going on, and maybe you this day is feeling a life of unrest. You don't find much joy in your life, and you find this constant battling within you. I would really suggest to you, and more than suggest, that you take a look at the Scriptures, and you need to, I think, as Bill said earlier, you need to examine yourself and say, who's running the ship this day? Because we do have battles. In fact, James says, where does wars come from? Don't they come from within, or fighting that we're having? Because we still are running the ship, aren't we?
And those battles you talk about, Terry, what are they? They're the opposite of peace. And so when we have peace within ourselves and with God, then we won't have those wars going on. And the way that we get to peace is by walking in the Spirit.
Yes. And I don't want to belabor it too much, but I think it's important that we take a look at this choice, because a lot of times people, they want the fringe benefits of being a Christian per se, but they still want to live in the world, and they want still act like the world and consider it as Paul's going to give us a list of the problems of the world, the things of the flesh here in a moment. But when it comes to a choice, are we going to serve Jesus Christ and look to be led of the Spirit, or are we going to live for ourselves? One of the first things Jesus said to a group of people, say, hey, if you want to be my disciples, you need to, first of all, you need to deny yourself. Bill, the second thing, you need to pick up your cross. And third thing, follow Jesus. And so here's Paul saying is you need to continue doing this, of walking in the Spirit, of following Jesus, right?
And the first thing was to deny yourself.
Yes.
Right.
And if you're not denying yourself, he's saying that's where you get that war going on in your life. If you're feeling that war right now, I would suggest that you really, go to the Lord and say, Lord, please, I surrender my life to you, and I want you to be Lord of my life, because whatever you're seeking for, if you do it in your own flesh, it's going to end up being, at the end of the day, a big fat zero. But if you delight yourself in the Lord, if you seek Him first, He'll give you everything that you so desire, that's good for your life. It's a simple equation, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And he says that in verse 18, it says, if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law anymore. So you don't have to strive to try to fulfill all the rules of the law. Yeah. So you're free from that bondage, even of what the law puts onto us.
Bill, maybe what you could do is he talks about the works of the flesh. I have the King James here. You have an amplified version. Why don't you read to us verses 19 through 21? I think it'd be beautiful for us to hear in here, verse 19 through 21.
So I'm going to read from the New Living Testament, which we have sort of ongoing discussions about these different translations, so I'll read it from the NLT. When you follow the desires of your sinful nature, the results are very clear. Sexual immorality, impurity, lustful pleasures, idolatry, sorcery, hostility, quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, dissension, division, envy, drunkenness, wild parties, and other sins like these. Let me tell you again, as I have before, that anyone living that sort of life will not inherit the kingdom of God.
Wow, isn't that a very strong statement that he's making there? If you're continuing in this kind of practice, you're faking yourself that you're a born-again Christian. You're faking yourself out, I guess, that you're living for God. He says that our life should be changed. What Paul here is saying is that we should have a desire in our lives to be led of the Spirit. And certainly we're not talking that we'll be sinless here at all, that we'll never fall into sin or make mistakes, but our life shouldn't be absorbed by sin, by these wild parties, fits of anger. I heard what you said when you said anger. There's a lot of people that are just bitter and filled with anger, and that God wants a better life for them. Division,
envy, drunkenness, all those things. And I must confess that before I was a Christian, some of those things sounded pretty good. If there was a wild party, I wanted to go.
Yes.
But what I didn't know was that there were consequences to that. There were consequences both to, my own behavior, all my relationships, and consequences the following days when you had guilt. And you realize that there was just no satisfaction in those kinds of things. And when you look at that list, there is no satisfaction or long-term joy in that list of results that come from walking in the flesh.
And Jesus picked it up, and if we would be honest ourselves and look at okay, if I were to go out to a party tonight, I'm going to be happy. Or somebody that's contemplating cheating on his wife or going out and getting drunk, where he says, what is a profit of man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? What good does it really get you? And anybody who I've dealt with who's really even committed adultery or whatever, they come back so broken because they realize it cost them so much. Right. And here's Paul trying to warn them of these things, right, Bill?
Right. And this is the truth. What we're given here and what the Bible says is the truth. Mm-hmm. And you can go through your whole life trying to prove the truth incorrect or wrong.
Yes.
But I'm here to tell you that you will never be successful in proving the truth incorrect of what's in the Word.
But now what he does, he kind of changes it for us. He gives us something. He says, as we've been looking at all the works of the flesh, and now he says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love. Aren't we so glad that he says, you could really what he's doing, he says, on one hand, if you want to live in the flesh, these are what they are, and make sure you understand if you're going to live that way, that's your right, yes, your choice, but don't be fooled. You won't be inherited in the kingdom of heaven. But and then on the other hand, if you're a person who's desired to be led of the Spirit, he says the fruit of that life, first of all, is going to be love, Bill.
Yeah, and I think it's very important. He says love first, and from that love, you'll experience in the New Living Testament. But the Holy Spirit produces this kind of fruit in our lives: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There is no law against these things.
Yeah, I think it's an easy choice. Because I think at the end of the day, really what all of us are looking for is love in our life. We're looking to be loved of God. We want to be loved by our friends. We want people to care about us. And we will also want to love other people. He says what God is saying for us to really experience that love is to be filled with God's Spirit. And First John, it tells us, John says something I think is very interesting. He says that God is love. And for us to experience the love of God, we need to be filled with His Spirit. And this is kind of an interesting word, Bill, this word love. In the original language, the Greek language during that time, you had what was called eros love, which was your physical love. You had phileo love that you would have for love of your family or love of your country. But there was a deeper love, Bill. share with them, the audience, about this love that you can know. We like to call it agape. That's what our church is known for. But really, it's a deep spiritual love. It's a love of God, right?
Well, and it's a love that's unconditional, that it flows out of, you recognize how much God loves you, and from that flows agape love. In the same manner in which he loves you, you love others.
Yes.
And so it becomes something that is unique. And thank God Greek has 4 different ways to describe love, these 4 different words. And, you were mentioning about how that's really what we all want. I was reading an article this morning about Harvard. They're nervous that they're going to have one of their research grants cut because of the current cuts in the government, and they've done a 85-year study of people that have graduated from there, and admittedly they're saying it is a little bit of a bias study, but the bottom line is they found that the one thing that correlates directly to people having a satisfying life is relationships with loved ones.
Isn't that amazing?
And so they've figured out, and this is our friends at Harvard, after 80 years of spending, I think, a couple $1 million a year at least on this study, they figured out what God tells us is the first thing that we need to have in the life of the Spirit. And if they just would have read their Bible, they would have figured it out without having to spend all that money. But they have done the research, and they've proven that what God says is accurate.
And it's so great, not only for a church, they reap the benefit of experiencing love with each other. But then, of course, the church is really modeled best at home, where a husband or a wife can really experience this unselfish love, this great agape love of God. And then also your children are able to benefit from the love of God. Later on, he talks about it, and he speaks a lot about this in the book of Ephesians, that he says, husband, you ought to love your wife as Christ so loved the church. This is the love that he's talking about, right?
Right. And he gave himself for it.
Yes. And the way that we can love each other, Paul, again, gives us the key in verse 16. He says, then I say to you, you need to walk in the Spirit. It's nothing that we can do of our own strength. I find myself as a man, I go, each and every day, I go, Lord, I need you. Lord, I need to be filled with your Spirit, that I can love my wife the way you would have me to love, that I can love my children, and then those people that God puts in my life. And you know what? It works. It really does. As we humbly ask God for that help and strength, and he gives us that ability to love one another, Bill.
Well, and I think also, Terry, we're talking about walking in the Spirit. And I think it's important for us to understand exactly what that means, how to walk practically. How do you live this out in your life? Well, the first thing, we mentioned it earlier, is that you have to abide. You have to be walking with Jesus. He is in the Spirit, and he is there with us. And, of course, so's the Holy Spirit. But the way that we walk in the Spirit is we walk with him. And by abiding with him, we want to obey what he has taught us. We want to obey the precepts and the things that come from, the New Testament and his teachings. Well, how do we do that obedience? Well, it tells us right here, the first thing is we'll have love. And so that love comes from obedience. And if we love God and love one another, as Jesus has taught us, then we'll be in that position where we'll want to be obedient and we'll want to continue to walk in the Spirit.
So, hey, wait a second, Bill. We've been having, this is so good talking about the love of God, but look what else that they have. It says not only that they are able to experience love, but they're able to experience joy. The joy that he's speaking here, of course, is different than happiness of the world.
Not the joy the world gives.
Yeah, because that's fleeting, right?
Yeah.
I was so happy this last little while because my baseball team, the Angels, were doing really good. and now they're hitting the road. I mean, they're not doing well. So my happiness is it's
Gone.
fleeting, right? But this is a different joy, a joy of the Spirit, isn't it?
Yep.
We, no matter what's going on, we can have that quiet joy. But then he says a peace. I always think one of the greatest benefits that we have is within our lives is the peace of God, knowing He's in control. Why don't you talk to our audience a little bit about the peace of God?
Well, we have two kinds of peace. We have the peace with God,
Mhm.
which comes through the reconciliation with Jesus, right?
Yes.
And that gives us peace with God because He's no longer coming after us for our sin,
Yes.
right? And then we have the peace of God because we have peace with Him. We can now rest in assurance and know that we have that peace for all eternity of where we're going to be.
Yes.
It's like a 2-for-1 deal on the peace department. It's really good.
And what I like about what the fruit of the Spirit, it deals with relationships with each other, and that's really what we're talking about
Yep.
here. It could be at workplace, certainly at church, or as we said earlier, with family life, long suffering, being patient with each other. That's not really our makeup right now because we're always we're on on demand. I want my answers now. I want you to change. But the Spirit gives us that ability to be patient towards each other also.
Right. And, patience is an interesting trait. It's one of those traits that it's difficult we can't beat it into ourselves.
No.
What happens is that if we strive to be patient, we're going to lose our patience, right?
That's so true.
So it's something that God, and really when you think about these things, they all come from God,
Yes.
So these are things that are imparted to us from God, but they're also things that are what I'd call like hyper blessings. They're such blessings that they're not just blessings on the fleshly level, they're blessings on the spiritual level, which is something that we as people on this earth, we can't just create those blessings.
It's so, as you look at this, as you continue on with meekness and temperance and and faith, there, it really speaks about the characteristics of God, and that we can know, now He wants us to be like Him. That's how we like to say we're Christ-like Christians. And here He says, if we walk in the Spirit, then our lives are changed day by day to be more like Him. Because God is loving. God is, wants to impart His joy and His peace upon our lives and His patience, with us. And I think it's so beautiful. But then he goes on in verse 24. It says, they that are Christ have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. And so, he's lining up the two. It says, if you're in the world, we understand that. But if you're saying that you're in the church, but you're still living with the world, he's saying, you're really not part of Christ, as he told us earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are a Christian, what you've done, you've counted the cost. How?
And you've crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. So you basically have decided, you've chosen to walk in the Spirit.
And he doesn't deny that the flesh, as we mentioned earlier, is attractive. That there's things where he says they crucified the flesh with the affections and desires. It has a draw. In fact, it speaks about Satan, that Satan was an angel of light.
Right.
And he comes in here and deceives, but it doesn't mean it's right. It always will end up in corruption.
Right.
And so a Christian's one that's counted the cost, has made a decision to say, I'm going to say no to my flesh. And probably the wisest things that I've ever learned was to say no to myself. It's hard to do that sometimes, especially if I pass at a Dunkin' Donut or something like that. But yet, to do things that are right is what God would have us to do, to make that right decision.
Yep. So then he says, if we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. So we're not only to be in that place, but we're to move through life so that we know that the Spirit is with us.
When Paul says something in a letter when you repeat something, because he repeated, verse 16, he says, walk in the Spirit. Now we're seeing here in verse 25, the walk in the Spirit. He's really writing that for emphasis for them. And I think it ties all the way up to the beginning. It says, stand fast in the liberty wherein Christ has made you free. And his heart, I think, was broken because he was seeing his friends once again being entangled with the yoke of bondage. And so he's telling them not only once, but twice, the real freedom comes when you walk in the Spirit. Bill, we got about 3 minutes left here. Why don't you kind of give us some thoughts how to maybe wrap up this chapter, and what's important to you to keep your life being that a man that deals with business and everything else that you go through, to keep your heart and life where you're walking in the Spirit?
As you were saying those words there, a thought went through my head, and I think we've said this a few times on the program, and that has to do with the motivations of being a Christian and talking about the motivations of witnessing. And one of the things, Terry, that it seems to me that's blatantly obvious from this chapter is that while being a Christian means that you deny certain things and that you have to make decisions, those things that you're denying might be pleasurable, at least on the outside, and they might look pleasurable for a longer term than they really are. But at the end of the day, the real fulfilling and satisfying life that even the Harvard study talked about comes from living a life that when you're walking in the Spirit.
Yeah.
And you can only live that life walking in the Spirit if you're abiding with Christ. And so our motivation as Christians is to carry that message, not that we know something more than anybody else. All we've done is read what the Bible tells us and tried to repeat that in a way that maybe people in the modern day might understand. And these truths are good forever. And so our motivation is to have more people living with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, and the fruits of the Spirit, and not the fruits of the flesh. And it's not about that we have some secret that we want to bring people into our group. It's that life is experienced more abundantly along the Christian path.
Bill, as we kind of wrap it up here, Jesus said something very interesting. He talked about a robber. He says a robber comes to rob, steal, and destroy. What is the robber trying to steal out of your life? Well, this fruit of the Spirit that we just talked about, the fruit of God's love for you, the joy that you would experience, the peace that God has for your life. But Jesus then said, he goes, I've come to give you life, and that more abundantly. It's easy. It's an easy choice for me. I hope it's an easy choice for you. As Bill just said, that we would live in the Spirit, that we would walk in the Spirit, that we could experience the abundant life that he has for us.
For information about this broadcast, or if you have any questions, feel free to mail us at Agape Chapel OC, P.O. Box 4023, Huntington Beach, California, 92647. Or you can email us at aft@agapechapelOC.org. Or visit our website at agapechapelOC.org. Until next time,